Okay.
Welcome, everybody.
Welcome, everyone. Sorry, we had a few technical issues to work out, so sorry we're a few minutes late starting. We're going to let everybody kind of get into the room before we jump off. Hope everybody is staying cool or trying to stay cool. And so just to give everybody a quick overview, we're going to be following along with a PowerPoint, which everybody will be able to see on the screen. What I'm going to do is, as I'm going through and discussing each PowerPoint, I'm going to stop at the end of this before I move on to the next slide. I'll ask if there's any questions. I'll take questions as we go, because what we recognized last time, it's sometimes hard to hold on to a question if you have a question about a statistic or a graph. So it's better just to kind of do it screen by screen rather than to wait at the end. So if you have questions, you can put it in the chat box and we'll try to answer it as best as we can. And all right. Kate, do you have anything else that you want to share as far as just sort of the how we're going to run this?
Yeah, so as you all kind of have noticed, we are in what's called webinar format. So you can see the presenters and the interpreters, but you won't be able to see yourself. That's for video recording purposes. If you are joining by phone, welcome. You are going to be muted, and if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, *9 will raise your hand, and then I will be able to give you the ability to chat. We also have the QA box along the bottom. We will be actively monitoring the box, so feel free to ask your questions in the box, and we will get to them. The chat feature itself has been disabled to streamline everything.
And I apologize in advance because everybody will be seeing a lot of my face as I'm the one who will be going through a majority of these slides. Fortunately, you'll be spelled at the end and Sandy will be on. All right, so Sandy, do you want to go to the next slide? All right, so we're going to be talking today about working together towards equity. And myself and Sandy, who's our cultural diversity and community engagement specialist, we'll be looking at statistics related to disparity and particularly looking at our purchase of service spending. And then Sandy will be speaking directly about some of our current diversity projects that we're currently funded for. All right, next. So we're going to talk about just a general code of conduct, some of the limitations to the data, talking about our population, about some of the services we provide, looking at particularly at disparities in services, and then finally looking at our efforts to increase equity and reduce some of those disparities. And next. All right, so general code of conduct, we want to be positive, respectful, patient. You're going to have to be very patient. There's a lot of statistics. A good listener, and let's wait with questions until the end of each slide. Next. All right, so some of the limitations to the data that we need to keep in mind as we're looking at everything. So this is not last year. This is basically looking from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. So it's looking at a previous fiscal year. These numbers that we're showing, these are tracked by the Department of Developmental Services. And some of the difficulties, some of the data, it's like kind of a photo in time. It's capturing services in a specific instance for that fiscal year. And it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the individuals are no longer part of Westside Regional Center. For example, a child may have reached the age of 3, was found not eligible, so was not continuing. And some of the individuals were transferred. So it's just one point in time. Next. Important also that in looking at POS data, some of the data that we're not able to see is some of our group contracts and some of the services that we provide for individuals that we support. Things like crisis support, supported employment, transportation, all of those services, you would not see whether or not individuals had gained those services because they're not individual POS. We pay these group contractors for an annual service, and so it's not reflected in this data. The data also excludes other kind of services we call like generic resources, such as IHSS services, special education services, other services that are supported by private health insurance and by Medi-Cal. All right, next. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our population. So in this fiscal year, what we were looking at, the total number of clients was about 10,646. And I know there's some of the numbers are kind of small. Hopefully you have your glasses on. The different color graphs that you can see. So blue represents individuals with a diagnosis of autism. And that's about almost 3,500 of the individuals that we supported that year were identified with autism. And the majority of individuals, 3,600, just a little bit more than that, were individuals identified with an intellectual disability. And then in the smaller population segment, we had about 201 individuals with cerebral palsy and only 99 individuals with epilepsy. And then finally, we had about almost 400 individuals that were identified as category 5 or diagnosed, brought in for services. And what that is that's a condition similar to intellectual disability. Next. Looking at the ethnicity of our regional center community, our largest population, almost 3,700 individuals identified as Hispanic, followed by 2,263 individuals that were identified as Caucasian, 2,700 individuals as Caucasian. 2,700. Our next largest group is Caucasian, followed by African American with 2,200. Our third largest population is individuals identifying as other. And basically, so that means that they may identify as multiple ethnicities or not have one of the ethnicities that they're representing is not included in this survey. And then we have about 500 individuals, a little over 500 individuals identifying as Asian. All right, next. Okay, so just kind of breaking it down by ethnicity, by age group, we can see in our largest population, the Hispanic population, the largest proportion of that population, almost 1,800 individuals, is between the age of 3 and 21. About 990 of those individuals are over 22, and 946 are in the early start 0 to 3 population. In our white Caucasian group, it's a little bit different. You see that the largest proportion of the population there is actually individuals 22 and over, followed by the 3 to 21 group, and with the least number in the early start 0 to 3. That's similar to the proportions reported in individuals identifying as African American, where we have the largest proportion of individuals 22 and older, followed by 3 to 21, and then with it's less represented in the 0 to 3 early start population. So you can kind of see how that's broken down. The red again is 3 to 21. The blue is the 0 to 3, and the yellow, or I guess that would be ochre, is the 22 and over population. Okay, next. And I know we're going through just kind of like demographic statistics, but if you have any questions or anything you're missing on the slide, feel free to put it in the chat, and Kate, just signal me if I need to stop. I'm also trying to kind of keep an eye on it and see if anything shows up in chat. All right, so looking at how our population breaks down by primary language, our largest proportion of individuals in our regional center, a little over 8,500 individuals report primary language is English, followed by about almost 2,000 individuals reporting their primary language is Spanish. We have about a little over 100 individuals reporting other languages, and we have about 54 individuals that are speaking Farsi. All right, next. Now breaking down demographics by residence types. So we have the majority of the individuals that we support, almost 9,000 individuals, report living at the home of a parent or guardian. And then significantly less, we have about 940, our second supported population, in independent or supported living situations, followed by 430 in community care, 274 youth in foster home situations. And then you can see we have ICF facilities, continuous nursing. We have about a little over 121 individuals, 26 in a what's called an FH, a family home, which is like a congregate supported living. Then skilled nursing, followed by individuals living in other identified residence situations. All right, next. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the services that we provide. Okay, Joyce, question about receiving a copy. And Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the PowerPoint is available on our website, is that correct?
Yes, at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, you'll see the direct URL or the link to view this. So if you go on westsidrc.org, and then if you click on transparency, you'll see the slides available on there as well. I will also put a post under the latest news of our homepage so that it will be easier for everyone to find the PowerPoint slides.
All right, thank you, Sandy. So this slide is a little confusing. What we're looking at is kind of comparing services that are approved. So in the IPP, in the annual IPP or the IFSP, we will identify services for the individuals, and those services will be approved. And then we're looking at the comparison between those that are approved as opposed to the services that are actually utilized. So you can have a service that has been approved, let's say, for example, like speech therapy was approved. However, if you don't access or use that speech service, it's showing up as it was approved but not used. So if we look at starting with our largest population group, we'll talk about individuals identifying as Hispanic. We can see that almost, and this is per person, so we average about $18,000 in services that are, and these are amount in US dollars per capita and it's per year, right? Sandy doesn't really specify. Is this per year?
Yes, it's
average per person per year.
Exactly.
Okay. So we're spending almost $18,000 per person per year for individuals identifying as those are actually services that are approved, as compared to but they're only utilizing approximately $13,000 per person of those services. And we can see the, with the Caucasian families, we have per person per year, we have about $33,000 being spent, as compared with 26,000 that are actually being utilized or used by that. Next group, we have African Americans with 31,000 and that are being approved, as compared to 24,000 per person that's actually being utilized. If you kind of look, so you can see how the graph is organized, and what we can see is that the largest amount per person spent per year, Caucasian families with a little over $33,000, compared to African Americans with being approved for 31,000. And then we can see the largest disparity looking at comparison between these groups and individuals identifying as Hispanic that are only using approximately 17,000. Asian is using slightly less services. They're being approved for 24,000, using about 19,000, and then other ethnicities reporting that they're using, it's about 20,000 that are being approved, with over 15,000 actually being utilized. So we can definitely see we have our work cut out for us. There is ongoing disparity. If we're looking at the different groups, that with the Caucasian group, more services per person per year compared with all the other ethnic groups. So ideally, we would see this being relatively equal. All right, questions on this graph before we move on? Any questions? And I'm going to try to get a little bit more diligent. Just all right. Let's go on to the next slide. All right. So this is amount spent on services actually utilized per person. So used. So you can kind of breaks out a little bit cleaner. We're per person per year. We're averaging $26,000 for individuals identifying as Caucasian, as compared to over almost 25,000 with individuals in the African American ethnic group. And then our third group, a little over 19,000 for Asian, followed by other ethnicity, and with the least amount of services being used in the individual for the population identifying as Hispanic, with a little over 13,000. Questions on this slide? Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So here we're breaking down the amount of services that are approved. So not necessarily utilized, but that have been approved per person, and breaking it down by ages. And we have three distinct groups. So in the yellow ochre group is those individuals in the 22 and over group. Red is those in the child to young adult, so 3 to 21. And then the blue is with services in the early start, 0 to 3. And if you kind of eyeball it, you look across it, you can see that our greatest disparity kind of in the graphing appears with our older population. And that's likely because we spend a lot more money on individuals in congregate living settings. Some of the most money we spend, for example, would be in like our fishing homes, ICF homes, supporting individuals medically compromised. We spend a lot of money in those particular settings and that's obviously usually in adulthood. So you're going to see a little bit more of a range in spending. Also, ILS and SLS services, probably one of our largest amounts of POS spending, and so varies depending on how people are utilizing or accessing those supports and services. Caucasians, again, per average, with about a little over 62,000 per person for the older population, significantly less, about 17,000 with the 3 to 21, followed by the early start 0 to 3. And that's fairly consistent. What we can see is most groups, the highest degree of spending is on the adults, followed by children 3 to 21, and followed by the early start group. Some of the greatest, it's pretty consistent. I mean, the biggest disparity is in the older population, but also we see some disparity with the 3 to 21. So that's relatively similar amounts to spending if you look across all the different ethnic groups, with somewhat less being spent in 3 to 21 in individuals identifying as Hispanic. So like, for example, Caucasian group, we're spending about an average of $17,000 per person for 3 to 21. And whereas we're only spending about almost a little over 11,500 for the Hispanic population. A lot of information. So folks, please feel free, ask me any questions as we go if you need anything broken down, because I know sometimes it takes a little discussion to get through them. So any questions on this slide?
Tom, I do have a question in the QA box, and it's in Spanish. I'm not sure if perhaps our translation team can see that and perhaps read it out loud and answer it. I'm going to run it through Google Translate so I can ask it in English for everyone else.
Well, Sandy, can you field that question, since you can both field it in Spanish and answer it? Oh, I guess you can answer it in English, then we can translate it.
So Frances Gomez, she's asking about the Hispanic population is a majority than other races. But regardless, they continue to have the least amount of access to services, and they continue to encounter more barriers to access those services. So that, I'm not sure if it was a question or if it was just a statement.
Well, it could be both, but first off, Francis, I agree that this has been a pretty consistent finding that we have, and I agree that there are more barriers and challenges. A lot of individuals, for example, being monolingual, Spanish speaking, I think it's sometimes, you know, adds a barrier, language barrier, other barriers. And Sandy, you can also speak to this, but things that we've seen over the last couple of years, really taking time to look at this, is challenges in transportation, challenges in childcare, challenges in dependent care. Sandy, what would you add to that list? Because I know you're much more familiar than I am.
Well, just things you mentioned in the past is that specifically for the Hispanic community, we tend to keep our families at home. So we didn't really see putting them in congregate living situations for our children. So that may explain why you spend more money on other ethnicities or races where the family may feel like, yes, you want them to be independent, we would like them to live on their own. But based on, you know, information we collected from surveys or having a focus groups, Hispanics tend to want to keep their families at home. So they want more services where they can keep their family at home. For example, they might want to access IHSS, where they can pay a family member to take care of their loved one, than to have their loved one go live elsewhere away from the family. And like you said, it just understanding the services, how that service can benefit their family. There's a lot of barriers, like you said, finding maybe a provider that would speak their language, that would understand their culture, which may be true for other cultures as well. So there's a lot of influences or that, you know, may prevent this person from receiving services.
All right, thank you, Sandy, and thank you for that point. I mean, it's definitely something that we've been looking at, we're aware of, and constantly trying to figure out ways around some of those barriers and challenges so that people can access the services that they're entitled to. So I appreciate that point. All right, let's, can we go to the next slide? All right, so here we're looking at the amount spent, actually utilized on services per person by age range. And again, so in the yellow group or the ochre, we have 22 and over. Red is our our child and young adult 3 to 21, followed by blue, we have our 0 to 3. And again, you're trying to keep me on my toes now, Sandy, I see. So, okay, there you go. So, again, you can see, so again, yellow, the older group and the over 22, that's where we kind of see some of our greatest disparity. If you're just kind of looking at the bar. So we're spending on average per year about almost $53,000 per individual in the Caucasian group, followed by, and the other ethnic individuals identifying as other, about 43,000, and African Americans about 42,000, and Asian Americans spending approximately 41,000 per individual, followed by the individuals identifying as Hispanic with about 31,000. So we're spending considerably less per person, again, with that group identifying as Hispanic, and again, Caucasian spending proportionally more on those individuals. When we look at the 3 to 21 grouping, we can see that it's somewhat more consistent, and similarly, the 0 to 3 is very consistent across what we're spending per person. But where we see we have a lot of work to do is with the 22 and over population. All right, next slide. All right, so now looking, breaking it down by residence type. And here, the yellow grouping is those that are in residential, so ICF, an intermediate care facility, an RFISHN, which is for individuals, who are medically compromised and require a good deal of nursing support, family health agencies, and so basically living in a congregate situation or a group situation, versus those, the red is ILS, SLS, so either living in an apartment or living in another kind of setting with independent living supports, and in blue, individuals living at home. So with Caucasians, we can see that we're spending the most amount per individual for individuals in residential settings, about almost $97,000 per person per year, as compared to in other ethnicity groups about 85,000, followed by Asian American, we have about 80,000, African American 72,000, and Hispanic. So again, it's a little bit more here. We see a little bit less of a difference in the numbers, but again, some of our greater disparity numbers is, again, we see it represented in the 22 and over, although we also see some differences when we're breaking it down and looking at our ILS, SLS spending in the different ethnic groups. We have about 76,000, and we're spending most per person in individuals identifying as other, followed by African Americans with 67,000 per person in the ILS situations, and then relatively consistent with Asian American, Caucasian, and Latino, with slightly more being spent with the Caucasian families in that group. And then we look at those living at home. It's a little bit more consistent, but again, we can see that those identifying as Hispanic, we're spending the least amount per person within the home setting. And Joyce, I see you had a question there. And the question, how do services compare with the population at large who could be eligible for said services across ethnicities? How do services compare with the population at large? So Joyce, Jocelyn, sorry. Jocelyn, I guess you're referring to individuals who are not eligible for regional center services. So just in general, is that, maybe you can clarify? What do you mean by population at large?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello? Okay. Yeah, I'm asking, if you look at the population at large and look at those who could use services, what percentage is the regional center capturing? So you're saying, like, for example, there were only 510 Asian individuals who are being served. But if you look at the population at large within the catchment area, does that reflect the full population of those who could be using services? Am I saying that? Do you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, if there are,
so individuals, so let me see. So individuals, let's say Asian Americans who would be eligible for services but may not, like what proportion of, so maybe 70% who are eligible actually pursued and found eligibility for services compared to about 30% that were ineligible. Is that correct?
yes, yes.
You know, honestly, I don't know. Sandy, have we encountered those statistics, your knowledge? Because we've done a lot of, we've read a lot of articles, and it's not coming to my mind exactly what the proportions are as opposed as to clarify those that are eligible versus not eligible in different ethnic groups. Sandy, are you familiar with any statistics on that?
Well, I don't have any that I want to say out loud because I don't want to give incorrect information. But I do know that that the Department of Developmental Services, or also called the DDS, I know that they have several projects where they're working with regional centers or with community-based organizations that their target or their goal for their project is to basically like child search. What they're looking for is trying to bring awareness about the regional centers in order to make them aware that you can get free assessments, that if you feel that your child is not meeting certain milestones or developing the way a typical child would, to seek us out to get assessed to see whether you qualify for the regional center services or not. So I know that it is an issue that we see in the larger population, and I do know that we do have regional centers or community-based organizations are trying to address this issue with projects where they go out in the community, or I guess right now it's more virtual outreach and informing the population about, hey, you know, there's this regional center in your area that can assist you if you feel that your loved one is not meeting certain milestones where they should be.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. And Jocelyn, I would add to that. I mean, I don't know the exact proportions and statistics, but once upon a time, I managed our intake and eligibility services, so I could certainly speak to it anecdotally, is that what we kind of found is that individuals in upper socioeconomic groups were more likely to refer for services. Whether or not the individual qualified, they were more likely to refer in general. So we were able to capture a lot more families that would be eligible. And that we found as we kind of went down, so for individuals in lower socioeconomic groupings, that they were least likely to refer. And that there was also a greater stigma attached to referring for services for developmental disabilities. Also within some of the individuals in the Latino population, there was a concern that, you know, because of possibly of legal status for individuals, that they were worried that there would be some, that they would have to, you know, they didn't want to give a lot of private information, didn't want to offer a lot of private information. So there's a lot of misunderstanding, not recognizing that that's confidential and private, and also around the stigma. And unfortunately, we know that there's a lot of minority groups are overrepresented in lower socioeconomic groups. So we had a lot of individuals that were just not referring because of either stigma or fear of giving private information and things like that. And upper SES groups were more, had more resources that were telling them and pointing them in the direction of coming to regional center. Their pediatricians were more likely to refer. The school was more likely to refer. So there's a number of more broader resources for referral. So we were capturing a lot more of those individuals. And that's kind of anecdotally in my experience, and I don't have specific statistics. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for taking my question, because I would think that from K through 12, you would at least identify the majority of the population, because they're used to catching them in schools. And so what happens to them after they leave, high school? How do they drop off? And that would be an interesting statistic as well.
Well, this is probably not going to surprise you, but there's better school districts than others. And some of the better school districts were more likely to refer. They just had better services for identifying and capturing students that were falling behind and referring them for individual education plans, referring them to the school psychologist. So they were captured earlier and more frequently in better school districts. And in lesser, more underperforming school districts, they were less likely to capture individuals that were falling behind, individuals that needed support services. And so they were less likely to be identified. And that's an unfortunate reality, just kind of looking at disparity in school district services. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, forging forward, next. Okay, so just looking across different groups, looking at the number of people that are receiving independent living support, supported living services, all age groups. So we can see that the largest group of individuals receiving ILS, SLS services are individuals identifying as Caucasian, about 427 individuals receiving those services, as compared to about 291 African individuals identifying as African American, 126 identifying as Hispanic, with less in the other ethnicity group and then the Asian group. So again, that's just breaking it down per service type across ethnicities. Sandy, you're reading my mind. Next. Okay, so looking at disparities specifically in services and service delivery. Okay, so this is people with and without services. So individuals that have been identified. So this is based on DDS data for 3 different status types. Status 1 is basically individuals that were found eligible for early start services. Status 2 is for individuals that were found eligible for services over the age of 3, or Lanterman services, we call them. And 0 is individuals that are in intake. So that is a little misleading, because it captures and incorporates individuals that are currently in intake, so they haven't been decided whether or not they're eligible for services. So they don't really have any services, but they're still being captured in this grid. And you can see the majority of folks, fortunately, a little over 9,100 individuals that are identified for regional center services and that are receiving those services. But unfortunately, we still have about 1,500 people, a little over 1,500 people that are eligible and that are not receiving any services. And so obviously that's a concern for us. In the last couple of years, we had disparity projects really focused on this statistic and really trying to, so any of the identifying individuals that were not receiving any services and doing a real focused outreach to that group to educate them about resources that might be available. And a lot of them just not familiar with different resources that they may be able to access, or just not as educated about what are some of the different options that were available to them. It's really trying to outreach and really trying to encourage those folks to start using some services they may or may not have thought about. All right, next slide. So breaking it down, kind of focusing on those individuals that are eligible for regional center services, but that are not receiving any kind of purchase of service. So our largest statistic, individuals identifying as Hispanic, followed by individuals as Caucasian, then African American, other, and then finally in the Asian American group. So troubling statistic, we can see that the largest proportion of the population not receiving any POS services is in the individuals identified as Hispanic. But it's troubling across the board. Ultimately, ideally, we don't have any individuals that are eligible for regional center that are not getting any kind of supports or services. So that's, but again, there's some services they may be utilizing, and we talked about this in the initial slide talking about data limitations. For example, they may be receiving crisis services, but that wouldn't be captured in individual POS data because again, that's sort of a group contract. So we don't pay them per person, we just pay them per the service. So it's statistically not captured. All right, any questions here before I move on, or any other questions? All right, next slide. So now looking across age groups for those individuals without services, and kind of looking over the last 8 years. So what percentage of our population of those individuals age 3 to 21, which is in red, 22 and over, which is in yellow, and 0 to 3, which is in blue, over the years that are represented in this group not receiving any kind of POS service, or at least service that's being reflected in the data. As you can see across is the largest percentage of individuals not receiving services kind of occurs between 3 and 21. And myriad of reasons for that. There are a lot of service, there's not as many service options as we have for 22 and older, but there are certainly a lot of services that people don't know about, social skills, therapies, different types of respite options that people may not be familiar with. But we certainly have a lot more service options, which is probably why people are utilizing more of the POS services in the 22 and older population. And we also have a lot of service options in our early start in our 0 to 3 population. So traditionally, those are two groups, and you can see we have less. So, and if we kind of look at the trending currently in our 3 to 21, we have about 27%, and that's, and unfortunately we see it was a little bit of an increase in the trend, and I don't entirely understand that. Well, actually, I do have one suggestion about why we've seen the trend going up. One of the biggest services that we offered in this group for 3 to 21 over the years was behavior services. And starting about 2017, the state put into law that insurance companies were responsible to provide those supports and services to individuals identified with autism. So we saw a significant reduction in us funding POS services for behavior. And so that you can certainly see that there's an increase right around 2017 that continues today. And that's one explanation. But there's certainly, that doesn't leave us, it's not totally excusable that there's other services that we can offer. And this is probably families just not aware of the different being creative and different services and supports they can receive. And fortunately in the other groups, so if we look at the 22 and older, we can see that there's been trending down. So whereas for example, if you look back in 2012, about 9% of individuals in the 22 and older group did not receive any POS services. And we've got that down in 2019 to about 7.3%. Probably my biggest joy and is that we have really reduced those individuals in our early start services that are not utilizing them. Back in 2012, we had almost 3.5% of that group that were not receiving any services. And in 2019, we got that down to 0.9%. And this is where you get a lot of bang for your buck with early intervention supports and services. So heartened by that, but certainly still ways to go as far as looking at the children's group and seeing how we might be able to reduce some of those individuals and that are not utilizing. All right, next. All right, before we move to the next, I'm going to ask Sandy, who's going to be taking over and talking about what are some of the things that we're looking at currently to address some of the service disparities. But before we do, are there any questions about the statistics or anything that people are wondering about before we move to the next section? All right, Sandy, it's all yours.
Okay. So I'm going to start talking about grant projects that have been completed in the past. So our two major ones that were completed is our Enhanced Case Management Project and our Parent Empowerment Project. So Enhanced Case Management Project, it was our service coordinators that were focused on our smaller caseload. So instead of being between 60 to 90 individuals they serve on their caseload, it was more about maybe 10 to 20, maybe 40 at once. And as for our Parent Empowerment Project, we collaborated with the Autism Society of Los Angeles. And we had these parents. So these parents were parents of clients who were a part of the regional center. So they went through training and they learned about how to help empower families to access services through a regional center. So these two groups supported 561 African American, Black, and Hispanic Latino clients and their families. And these individuals were identified as having little to no services that were funded by the regional center. So what they did was they taught them how to navigate various systems, for example, our regional center, special education, public social services. So it could have been like Medi-Cal, it may have been IHSS, stuff like that, Social Security. They assisted them in accessing 625 regional center services. So examples are like transportation services, respite, after school care, social skills, behavior intervention. They also help them access 1,246 public and community services. So those services could have been in-home supportive services, also known as IHSS, support in the IEP meeting or communicating with schools, health services, and maybe issues with immigration as well. Other things that our projects focus on was increasing access to information. So in case you haven't done so, please follow us on our YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. We really share a lot of great resources to our community. We give them alerts. For example, right now we give alert about the Flex Alert to reduce and save energy to prevent blackouts in your home and in your community. We also talk about distribution events, so for food, maybe any rent relief programs, information about COVID that the community should know. We also have our e-newsletter. So there's one that's going every week from our interim executive director, which is Tom. We also have another newsletter that goes around, which is specifically about information and resources that are being offered at Westside Regional Center and in your local community. So if you haven't done so already, please update your email address and contact information with your service coordinator so that we may have access to sending you this information that may be important for you to understand and to inform yourself. We also have our website that was redesigned and updated. So something that you can do is search services by age range. So if you are an early start family, your child is between 0 to 3, we have a specific page that will talk about services that may be available to your child, as well as resources, supports that may be available at Westside or in your community. We also have our events calendar. So if you're interested in joining any support groups or trainings, webinars, or participating in our committees, you can find information there. Also our latest news, so any updates, emergency updates, or just information that may be helpful for our families will be found under latest news. We also have 2 resource pages. So one is for general resources. So general resources can be our publications, it can be our videos, information about special education, our LGBTQ community, mental health services, stuff like that. And our COVID-19 for resource page is basically several pages of resources that are specifically for the community we serve. So it can be information from many community-based organizations. It can talk about how to talk to your child about COVID-19, where to access testing sites. It can also talk about free or low-cost mental health services, financial assistance programs, you know, about unemployment or employment opportunities. It will all be found in our COVID-19 research page, which is found on our homepage. We also have our YouTube channel. So meetings such as this one will be found on our YouTube channel. So if you type in Westside Regional Center, you'll find our YouTube channel. You can subscribe and you'll have access to our education series that we've uploaded that talks about the regional center and what we do, and our service coordination, all that stuff. And we also have recorded trainings and meetings. So majority of the time, anything that we may record will be available to the community as well. For access to services, we worked with our enhanced case management project staff, and what they did was create these amazing brochures. So a lot of families are requesting that they wanted to know what was available for their child, but by specific age range. And so what was developed is this really great brochures that talk about services available for those between birth to 3 years, 3 to 10, 11, 17. So you'll become more aware about what's out there for you to help support yourself or your loved one. We also have an information and resource booklet. So if you want to know how to navigate our system, how to work or create a partnership with your service coordinator, how to request services through your service coordinator, or how to appeal a decision that the regional center has made, all really great information in the information and resource booklet. The blue links that you see on this slide are live. So if you do download our PowerPoint slides, you can just simply click on the blue links and it will take you directly on our webpage for you to access this information and these booklets. We also have our transition from high school to adulthood. So if you have a loved one that's between the ages about 14 to 22, this booklet will really help you in many areas, from navigating the special education system to trying to pick whether a certificate completion or a high school diploma is ideal for your loved one. Really great information about living on your own, legal information, how to transition from a pediatrician to a family medicine physician. Really great information that you can just go through. And all these resources are available in English and Spanish as well. And we also have a Understanding the Diagnosis, a guide for families. So maybe you don't understand much about your loved one's diagnosis, whether it be the autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, stuff like that. We do have these really great handouts, as well as a contact information for staff at Westside. Like maybe you can set up an appointment and maybe talk more about your child's diagnosis and things that you can do to help them or help yourself as you navigate this new journey. So we have a new project for 2020. A little bit of background about this is that it's based on feedback provided by our Black and Latino underserved families. So this information was collected by our enhanced case management and parent empowerment projects. And it was also based on our large survey that we asked family to provide feedback to us in 2017. So some of the barriers that families mentioned during the time they spoke to us or took our survey is that a lack of knowledge of available services and supports for their loved ones or for themselves, not knowing how to obtain regional center services, communication, either communication that regional center provided to families or maybe families or service coordinators, also a lack of confidence in Westside Regional Center. So many families felt that we were not giving equal information to all families. Many felt that they learned more from other families in the regional center themselves. So they kind of had a lot of confidence in the regional center or service coordinators and providing them accurate information and up-to-date information. Other comments that was provided from these surveys or focus groups or anything like that is families are asking for us to inform them on services that are available and inform the family on how they can get the services. Workshops which can educate and enlighten us parents, stakeholders about service programs for our children's future. And the regional center could help a little more with the transitions of services. So we gathered all this information and tried to figure out a way to help our families, specifically our Black and Latino families, to really access regional center services. So Department of Developmental Services, the Disparity Funds program, they funded us. They gave us $106,018 for the duration of 12 months for us to develop 2 workshop series. One that is focusing on early childhood, another one for those from high school to community life. Our target audience was 150 Latinos, 100 Black, and 50 other / multicultural individuals. The Early Childhood Transition Workshop is for parents and guardians of children ages 2.5 to 8 transitioning out of their Early Start program. Or for those to transition out at 3, it's more for those families that were not found eligible for regional center services. But then later on, when they were going to school, the teacher noticed that there was a delay in some way. And when they returned to the regional center, found out that they actually are now eligible for regional center services. The goal of the workshop is to prepare families in navigating the regional center system, the school system, and community and public service systems. We want to offer resources to support them during this transition period and beyond. And the goal was to offer this 4 times a year. Our second workshop series was for adolescents and young adults between the ages of 14 to 21 and their families who are exiting the school district into life in the community. So either they're exiting with the high school diploma at age 18 or maybe up to 22 with a certificate of completion. It will be specific to each grade and high school completion option. It will prepare students for life after high school. It could be college, employment, internships, day services. Maybe they want to live independently, whatever the goal of the adolescent was. And the goal was to offer this 5 times a year. Unfortunately, when we developed this proposal last year, this was before COVID. So when we found out that we received funding in around February to early March, we realized that a lot of our activities that we wished to do were not going to be possible. So with permission from DDS, we're going to be transitioning our series online instead of in person. The series will be recorded live and later available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and under Facebook videos. We also collected feedback via an online survey. The survey was in English and Spanish. We wanted to get an understanding of the community's current needs. So we understood that the COVID pandemic changed everything. Students were distance learning, services that they received from the regional center were no longer in person but virtual. Families were informing us that they were struggling and they needed some type of information to really help them get through this time. So the goal of our surveys was to basically capture this feedback and use it to guide our project's training topics. Any questions about our 2 workshops or any of our past projects or anything like that? Okay, so I'll move on to questions and answers. So there's some feedback we would like to hear from the community or any other professionals or service providers out there is what barriers are currently preventing you and your family from accessing regional center services? And how can Westside Regional Center reduce or eliminate these barriers? So if you have any comments to share, please share maybe the Q&A or maybe prompt Kate if you want to ask or share your feedback out loud or in the chat box. But this is a great time for us to actually hear from you and how can we do better and what activities or the way we provider services can be changed in order to ensure that the community is able to access services from the regional center.
And a friendly reminder, those on the phone, *9 will raise your hand. And for those of you joining us by computer, the QA box should show up as a little thing to click on at the bottom of your screen.
So there is a question, if Tom, you want to appear. Why is it that expenditures such as, why is it that expenditures such as psychological evaluations requests by regional center can't be included in self-determination budget?
Huh. That's a good question. I'll be honest, I didn't know that they couldn't be incorporated. I mean, I think this is, so for, certainly as far as an intake, I don't think it would be, they wouldn't be identified for self-determination at that point. But for reevaluation, I honestly don't know how that works. I don't know, Caesar, if you're listening in on this, if you could speak to that question. He's more of our internal expert on self-determination, but I did not realize that you couldn't incorporate reevaluations in that funding.
Hey, Tom, I don't know if you guys can hear me now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, so that is looked at as a one-time item, and typically one-time items would not be able to be included. However, if based on that assessment or evaluation, if services were recommended and needed, then that would be added to someone's budget. Those one-time items are seen as, just what they are, one time, meaning the next year you're not going to have potentially another psychological evaluation. So that money is just being used for that one specific service and time.
Thanks, Caesar.
Sure.
Does that answer the question? Okay.
No, I think.
No?
Oh, I saw, no.
Oh, no, it does not answer the question.
Is it possible for us to have Sonia
Yes,
on the?
I'm here.
Okay.
Well, my question is, if this expenditure is something that cannot be added to self-determination, then why was it put under like a service that it was used? Why didn't it go in a separate line item?
Well, it's a good question, tough to answer. Caesar, I don't know if you have any input. I'm not sure how that works, because like he's saying, so it is a one-time expense. I don't know why it's not added as a service item, but it's certainly something that we could look at, how we could open that up.
Yes, if you could do that, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good question. Thanks. Other questions, comments, concerns?
I think I don't see any more questions.
Well, everybody, I really appreciate you being here. I hope everybody's able to stay cool and stay safe. We've got, it's either heat or COVID, so we've got multiple threats at this time. So please stay safe. And if there's any other questions, I mean, you can always try to reach out to us. My email, you can always email me, tomk@westsidrc.org. And we also have an information email if you want it, if you have just general questions. Sandy, anything that you would conclude with?
Just a reminder to everyone that aside from putting it on this link here, I will also be making it easier for everyone to access the copy of the slides by putting it under the latest news of our homepage. Just giving about like 10 minutes after this presentation for it to appear on the website. Ooh, and Caesar has a follow-up to that question from Sonia.
Sure. Hey, Sonia, that's a great question. And every single dollar that is spent is identified in that in that 12-month expenditure report, even if it's just one, if it's a one-time item. And if you recall, part of the DDS tool that we use to develop a self-determining budget, there is a specific section there that identifies those one-time items that must be removed from someone's budget. So I understand what you're saying, that it's being identified as expenditure, as something that was spent on the individual. But again, based on the regulations, those one-time items must be subtracted from someone's budget.
And Sonia, did you have any other feedback that you wanted to give to that, or anything else?
Yes, in the meetings for self-determination that I attended, I never once remember saying that one-time items were not going to be included. Everything that I remember focused on the last 12 months. So this is where my confusion comes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was having a hard time unmuting myself here.
Story of my life.
Hey, Sonia, I know.
I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
Kate, can you and Mike unmute Caesar?
Yeah, I couldn't hear.
It looks like maybe he got knocked out. That's weird.
Well, Sonia, what I'm going to suggest, if we don't come back to it, is this is something that I would recommend to the self-determination group to bring up at the next advisory meeting. I think that's a really good input. It's a good question. I wish I had a better answer for you, but yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's something we could definitely talk about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Okay.
Can I have some popcorn?
And just want to thank everybody for attending, and have a good day and stay safe. Take care of yourself and stay cool.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yes.
Kate.
I do see another question.
Did Tom leave?
I think yeah.
Is Caesar, are you unmuted?
Yes, I got unmuted.
Okay.
And I'm back.
Okay, maybe you can answer this question. Can the parents, still the parents can receive the POS for their son or daughter with the IPP? Or I guess it's, can the parents still receive the POS for their son or daughter with the IPP? Or if Frances wants to unmute herself, or if we can unmute Frances.
So Sandy, I think what I'm understanding the question to be is, can an individual still receive a service without an IPP? I think that's what the person was trying to ask.
Francis, si quieres hacer su pregunta.
And Francis should be unmuted as well, if you'd like to speak.
Francis? Okay.
Sandy, can you hear me?
Yes. Liz, I can hear you.
I don't know if that question was specific to self-determination or a general question about services and an IPP. You must sign the IPP in order for services to be delivered. There can be a disagreement and the IPP is held off being signed. And there are some other avenues to travel, such as if a service has, if you want a service to continue and there's disagreement, you can request an appeal and keep the service continuing via something called aid paid pending. And so you would hold off on signing the IPP until that determination was made. But if you're requesting a new service, you really must have a signed IPP. It's like any other contractual agreement. You're agreeing that the service is going to begin, where it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. And both parties signed that we both agree this is needed and a good service. So I don't know for sure that was Francis' question.
Yeah, I think it kind of hit that mark. Her question is just if clients are still going to receive services from the regional center along with their IPP, or if they have to request that service separately from the IPP.
It depends on if it's a new service, a continuation of service. So probably we would need some more clarification from Francis, because Caesar, especially, yes. I don't want to be giving out incorrect information.
Right, definitely.
So I think if Francis could clarify, so we know that we're answering this correctly to the intent of her question. And she can, Francis, if you're still there and just unable to, I don't know what, maybe you were muted or something, but if you call, yes. Yeah, if you call either of us or any of us, we can definitely go over your question individually and give you correct information on that.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Can
you hear me now?
Yes, Francis.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Because, yes, I want to explain myself. My question is, the clients are still receiving the IPP document with the POS together for any service during the year, or the parents need to request the POS separately?
Francis, what do you mean when you say POS? Are you talking about requesting a service?
No. Estoy hablando acerca de los servicios de compra que el cliente tuvo durante todo el año, aunque no esté en autodeterminación.
Claro, ok. Estás hablando del reporte anual de todos los servicios y los gastos que fueron usados durante el último año, ¿verdad?
Es correcto.
Ok. So, voy a traducir. Sandy, is someone translating in English if I speak in Spanish, or do I have to translate?
Kate?
We don't have anybody translating back into English, no.
Okay. So the question was, are families still receiving on an ongoing basis, along with their, IPP, the annual cost statement that should be coming out on someone's birth month? That's what Francis was inquiring about. So Francis, sí, cada año en el cumpleaños, el mes que el individuo está cumpliendo años y se está haciendo el IPP, el consejero tiene que llevar y darles el reporte fiscal anual a la familia. A veces ese reporte se demora un mes a lo más porque el departamento de cuentas está un poco atrasado, pero típicamente es el mismo mes que cumplen años o a lo más tardado el próximo mes. So I was telling, I was saying that the annual cost statement typically also comes out on the individual's birth month when we're doing the IPP. Sometimes it could get a little delayed, and it should come out no later than the following month after the birth month. And the service coordinator is handing that out to the individuals and or family when they're doing the IPP or shortly thereafter.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Yeah.
you're welcome.
I don't think we have any more questions at this time.
Looks like our question box is clear, chat box is clear, and I'll hand it down.
Sorry, Tom.
Without further ado, folks, we thank you again. These resources will be available on the website, and those of you who registered to attend, I will send a follow-up with a link as well.
All right. Thank you, Kate, and thank you to our interpreters for being here and for assisting us in this. And I hope everyone has a really great day. Stay safe, and remember to conserve our energy from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. until tomorrow.
Thank you, Sandy.
Mm-hmm.